That is what determines the price of jade, is the demand from China, and that is likely to increase. Again, this is to do with the economic factors of the growth of the middle class in China, and the realization in China that Nephrite Jade is the original jade, and that was sort of forgotten about 30 years ago when Burmese jadeite was considered to be Chinese jade. That has changed, and the appreciation of nephrite has reestablished itself as the original jade of China and the favorite.
Welcome to Jewels of the Trade, the channel for spreading accurate information on jade and gemstones. I'm here with Kirk Makepeace and his daughter Nikki of Jade West, one of the leading Nephrite Jade suppliers in the world. We've already spoken with Nikki in part 1 of our Canadian Jade series, and today we're introducing Kirk Makepeace to the channel. Kirk, you have quite a legacy in this industry. You've been featured in many famous publications, including National Geographic, and recently Lotus Gemology's Jade, a Gemologist's Guide. Where does your story begin? How did you get into the jade industry?
A starving university student trying to make tuition. I took a summer job in a very remote part of northern British Columbia, not knowing what I was getting into. And this goes back into the mid-1970s, and it was a really extremely remote mining camp. We stayed in tents and got resupplied by a float plane every few weeks that would bring in some fresh food. And our job was to explore the valleys of jade boulders that were left over from the last ice age, about 20,000 years ago. My job was to pack around a little diamond drill and a pump and fuel, and we would search for these boulders and then sit on these little drills for hours at a time to retrieve a drill core that would indicate the quality of the jade. It lasted from usually about a 90-day season between snowfalls. Again, extremely remote, really tough conditions, but I liked it, and it became my life. I didn't know it at the time, but this is 50 years later almost, and I'm still doing it and still enjoying it.
In reference kind of to your recent article in Lotus Gemology's Jade, a Gemologist's Guide, I wanted to discuss the Canadian history with jade because it's very unlike the Chinese history with jade. We don't know as much about Canada's history as we do about China's when it comes to jade, but it sounds like archaeologists have found evidence of Indigenous peoples using jade in Canada for possibly thousands of years as celts and chisels. Do you think that tribes possibly had a similar reverence for jade as what we found in ancient China, New Zealand, and Mesoamerica?
A reverence for jade, yes, but on a different level. Our indigenous tribes using jade goes back a couple of thousand years, not to the length of China, perhaps rivaling New Zealand Maori history, but it was not a symbolic stone as such as the Maoris, and it wasn't revered to the same almost religious awe. It was appreciated as a phenomenal tool that rivaled anything else that was available. And it would be often exchanged, not really traded, but exchanged with other tribes with, sometimes up to 500 miles away. The importance of this jade tool would get passed along. It wasn't an adornment that would be worn. It was the presence of it as a adze or axe or as a chisel. The properties of jade are so phenomenal that it has rivaled the stone, the Bronze Age and other cultures. Jade just was that important.
Well, its use in tools is certainly a testament to its toughness, which makes it such an incredible stone for jewelry.
The history of Canadian jade used as jewelry. As I said, the Aboriginal use of it goes back a couple of thousand years, but its conversion to jewelry began when the discoveries in British Columbia began to be exported to New Zealand, where there was a market, in Germany, and then into Taiwan was the first country of export of Canadian jade. So this occurred in the 1960s when the jade mines of British Columbia were first found, and there was a desire to find a market for the jade stone. Taiwan was the market of choice because China was still closed for commercial trade with the West. And so the products that started to be made out of jewelry only began again in the 1960s and into the 70s.
Was Jade West the first company to do that?
There was a number of companies when there was jade found in the Fraser River, not that far from Vancouver, in the 1930s and 40s, and a small market, international market was developing, but we're talking very, very small. And then in the 1970s, 3 massive deposits of jade were found in northern British Columbia. Coincidentally, all at the same, within the same time, hundreds of miles apart, but it all occurred. And that was the Cassiar Jade mine, the Kutcho Jade mine, and the Ogden Jade mine. All came on within a 3-year period in around 1970. Massive deposits of jade were found with no market. What do we do with all of this jade? This intrigued some very large companies. A Japanese bank was the first investor to develop the Ogden Mountain mine, and then a large oil company developed the Kutcho Jade mine, and then Cassiar asbestos, the jade was a byproduct from that mine. So no small company was involved in jade, but very large companies. Well, every one of those large companies failed. There was massive deposits of jade, but not what to do with it. There was no market. China was still closed to international commercial trade. New Zealand would buy a little bit, Germany a little bit, but not enough to cover the costs of these very remote mines that required quite a bit of jade to be able to be sold to operate the mine. And what happened with the story of Jade West is, as all of these major mining companies failed to make a success of jade mining, along came Kirk, who purchased these big companies one after the other and took over the mining operations. And my vision of mining jade was different from the major companies where they would spend big hunks of money and then not being able to sell the jade. My operation was a little bit more thrifty, and the only way I could survive is if I could sell the jade that I produced. And that began how Jade West grew and was able to take over one mine and then another mine, and the largest of the mines, which allowed Jade West to have a reputation of being this massive jade producer.
So Jade West owns many different mines. Can you dive into the different mines of Canadian jade that you deal with, and what makes each material coming out of those mines unique?
The jades found in British Columbia all have a similarity in the fact that they're all serpentinite-based jade deposits that are green. Various grades of green, but that they're all green. We don't have any white nephrite found so far in British Columbia. And I would hate to say that we have produced black jade, because although we have black jade that's found, it doesn't rival what's found in Wyoming or South Australia. Those black jades are on a league of their own. Our jades are green, and they all have similarities, but they're all uniquely different. Every jade deposit that we discover, and sometimes they'll only be 10 yards apart from a new deposit, sometimes 5 kilometers apart. They'll have similarities in their formation, but each one of them will have a fingerprint that can identify where it came from. So Ogden Mountain, further south of the large jade mines, has probably 20 different deposits on the mountain, and every one of those jade deposits is uniquely different. So I can pick up a piece and say, oh, this one, I remember mining this one in 1985 because I remember when we mined it, and it will still have a fingerprint that is different. So how do I identify it? Well, it's a lot of days based on the experience of dealing with the jades. They're all green. Some of them will have black spots. Some of them will have green spots. Some of them will have white spots, and some of them will have no spots. They'll just be beautiful green. That uniformity will travel from one mine to the other, but they have unique differences. The Polar mine, very famous, but the smallest of all the jade mines that are world famous, the jade has a unique hardness to it. Now, how can one jade be harder than the other? Well, polar jade is a harder jade. Because of that hardness, you'll find polar jade has a polish that rivals jadeite. And that can be attributed to the fact that it was just a little bit harder. Polar jade, the brilliance of the green, a little bit brighter, a little bit richer color.
Which mine is producing the highest yield of your best quality of jade?
The mine that produces the highest quality would have to be the Kutcho Jade mine. It's also the largest of all the mines. It has probably more than 100 different deposits spread over about 10 square miles.
So, Kirk, can you talk a little bit about what makes the Canadian jades different from other sources of jade? It might be a little known fact to everyone watching this that Kirk is actually an expert also in the Russian jades. So I'm hoping that you can kind of compare the Canadian and the Russian. And I'd also love to know if you can determine the origin of Canadian jade with visual identification.
The first question, what separates Canadian jade versus other nephrite deposits such as Russian jade? The formation in both the Russian jade, the other famous jades, would be the New Zealand greenstone jades found on the South Island, and Canadian jades, and Alaska jade. The similarities in their formation are identical. They're all formed exactly the same way. And the similarities of the jade are extremely similar. But as discussed earlier, when jade is formed, it will pull little parts in the metamorphosis process, provide little pieces of the other stone that when the jade was created, and allow you to have the different characteristical spots, inclusions in the jade. So New Zealand jade often will not have chrome spots in it. The little bright green spots that are identifiable. That is found in almost all of the Canadian jade deposits, some more than the others. The Cassiar jade has the most chrome spots, but Ogden has it, Kutcho has it, but not found in the New Zealand jades. In the Russian jades, again, similarities are there. They're both formed the same ways, but you can tell them apart just, if you're around a person familiar with jades. Russian jades will have characteristics that are unique to the Russian jade. The translucency, the black spots, the size of the black spots, and the spacing of the black spots in some of the Siberian jade, or the phenomenal, spectacular Siberian jade that is often called the number 7 deposit. It's a beautiful, beautiful, unique green jade. Something that would even, compare to the very best Wyoming emerald apple greens. But the Russian jades, you can tell them apart. Again, formation of all these jades, almost identical creations, but they have telltale fingerprints that you can tell them apart. So yes, the Russian jade is visibly different than the Canadian jade, which is visibly different than the New Zealand jades, and the Taiwan jade the same way. The jade deposits were found in Taiwan. Similar creation, but you can tell them they all have different fingerprints. The Russian jades probably rival the Canadian jades in the size of the deposits and the potential for producing jade for in the next few centuries. Similar deposits. There's socioeconomic factors that fall into the Russian jade being available on the market these days, and that's another topic, but it's more to do with politics than it does to do with the actual deposits of jade and what will become of them. Right now, the jade deposits in Russia are limited on their export, and again, those are political decisions. But as far as if we take the politics out of it, they're both the Russian jade deposits. The Russian jade industry is certainly a major rival for the Canadian jade industry, and that has occurred in the last 20 years. It's become a very large part of the world's nephrite deposits. So Russia's doing very well, other than the political situation.
How do you think that the current limitations on Canadian jade mining combined with the limitations of the jade trade in Russia are going to affect the value of nephrite jade moving forward?
The value of jade going forward will always be determined by the demand by its number one fan, Chinese. That is what determines the price of jade, is the demand from China. And that is likely to increase as the decades go on. And again, this is to do with the economic factors of the growth of the middle class in China, when we can appreciate that almost every Chinese wants to own a piece of jade, and the realization in China that nephrite jade is the original jade, and that was sort of forgotten about 30 years ago when Burmese jadeite was considered the Chinese jade. That has changed, and the appreciation of nephrite has reestablished itself as the original jade of China and the favorite. So the value of jade, as China wants to own jade, as the China is such an important part of their life, their culture, that will be the major factor on the price of jade. Whether Canada and Russia increase their production or decrease production is certainly has an influence on the price of jade, but the demand from China for the jade is going to be the major development in the cost of jade, or the value of jade.
The cost of everything, like our products, are going to get limited drastically quickly because the cost of manufacturing is going up so much.
But there's still plenty of product on the website waiting to be bought. And I would say now is the time for anyone who is worried about access to this beautiful material in the future. Get it now. Go to jademine.com and snatch it all up.
All of our jade mines are also part of the Aboriginal-owned land of Canada. Our relationship with the Indigenous people who were here before the Europeans arrived, this is a critical part. And the future of jade mining in Canada is part of us working with Aboriginals or the Indigenous people of Canada to allow us to be partners in the future production of jade. Our partnership with the Indigenous people of Canada is an integral part of the future of the jade industry in Canada. Without our cooperation of the Indigenous people, there will be no jade production coming from Canada. So we welcome our opportunities to partnership with the Indigenous people of Canada to develop the mines. And if that happens, Canada will be producing jade for centuries to come, and will continue to be probably the major supplier of nephrite jade for centuries.
Anybody who's looking to shop can visit jademine.com. Nikki, how else can people get in touch with you if they have questions, if they're looking for specific product? How can they connect directly with you?
Oh, email is typically best. You can email us at info@jademine.com, or if you just go on our site, there's links that you can find to contact us.
www.jademine.com. Cat's eye is common in almost all the nephrite deposits that are found in Russia, in Canada. It is. I'll let Nikki describe what it is, but it's very common in all of our deposits. Most common in the Cassiar jade in British Columbia, but found in each one of the mines. So, Nikki, you can comment on the cat's eye dilemma in nephrite.
Yeah, it's definitely a dilemma right now because for years I've been told that it's cat's eye nephrite, and we've been selling it, and I've been talking with GIA about it. So we gave them a bunch of samples to test, and the composition is nephrite. However, nephrite jade is famous for its extreme toughness. And so when you've got this cat's eye chatoyant effect, it's caused by the fibers facing one direction. So it's no longer interlocking fibers, losing its toughness. So they're saying it's actinolite, but they can call it cat's eye jade as a trade name. But the only thing that's differentiating it is the toughness. So it doesn't hold the same toughness as all our jade, but you can see it formed all throughout the jade. It's just like a vein, or depending on the way you cut it to get that cat's eye look. It's found in the jade. It just doesn't hold the extreme toughness that all our jade has.
Well, this is a piece of nephrite with a number of bands of actinolite cat's eye chatoyancy running through. And what they are, they're bands running vertically up and down in this piece of jade. And that, if one was going to make a cabochon and polish it, you would get the cat's eye effect. And so what Nikki was describing it as is bands of ternolite actinolite running in a parallel instead of a interlocking fibers. So you get and so what happens there is, because they're not interlocking, your fibers of actinolite tremolite do not have the extreme toughness that regular nephrite would have.
Do you think that the Chinese market regards the cat's eye actinolite as jade?
Oh, 100%. Yes. It's in China, I've sent them all these tests and everything, and what GIA and some other countries are calling it just actinolite, where China's like, no, this is jade. They'll show you the boulder that they're finding it in. And because it's just not got the toughness that all jade has.
The Chinese market identifies it as cat's eye nephrite jade.
Yeah.
So do you feel then that because culturally they consider it jade, that it is appropriate to call it cat's eye jade on the market?
Even GIA says it could be the trade name is cat's eye jade. And it is jade. It just doesn't have the toughness of it. So
right.
I am not opposed to calling it jade still, because it's found within the jade. It's just not sharing the extreme toughness throughout the boulder.
I am looking forward to sort of resolving this terminology and, kind of firming up the nephrite nomenclature just for the sake of ethical sales. I think that should be the number one priority is, are we doing right by the customer? And are
100%.
We telling the customer what they need to know?
Yeah, I want everyone to have as much information as possible.
Yes.
Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah. And especially with so many things that are nowhere close to jade being sold as jade, like quartz, it's more important, in my opinion, with jade to be articulate and specific about what it is that we're selling, because you can't just call anything green jade. Words have to have meaning. Kirk and Nikki, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and information with the Jewels of the Trade subscribers. Anybody who wants to learn more can visit jademine.com.